Soraya had spent her whole life being unseen, so she knew the exact moment the entire pack finally looked at her. It felt like cold water poured down the back of her neck. She was not supposed to be looked at. She was the silent-born girl who tended the dead, and her place on the night of the claiming was at the very edge of the great hall, behind the last row of torches, holding the bowl of ash that the rites required. 300 wolves filled the chamber between her and the dais. She had come to light the ancestor candles, and then disappear, the way she always disappeared, into the gap that the pack left around her, like she was a draft they could feel but never name. It suited her, mostly. A draft went everywhere and was blamed for nothing. She had learned to move through the hold in the seams of other people's attention, and on a night like this, with the whole pack drunk on ceremony and the moon hanging fat and white in the great window, she had expected to be the least remembered person in a chamber of 300. That was the plan. Light the candles, carry the ash, vanish. Then King Theron walked the length of the hall to take his place beneath the moon window, and as he passed the spot where she stood, half swallowed by shadow, something happened that should not have been able to happen. He stopped. The Alpha King of Valemore stopped walking in the middle of his own claiming, and his head turned, slow and helpless as a compass needle, until his eyes found her in the dark behind the torches. And Soraya, who had no wolf, who had never in 19 years felt the thing the others described as the bond pull, felt something reach up out of the floor of her chest and seize her by the ribs. It was recognition. It was a key, turning in a lock she had not known was inside her. She had no wolf to leap toward him, no second self to strain at the leash, and so the feeling had nowhere to go. It simply filled her, floor to crown, warm and total and certain, the way she imagined other wolves must feel every ordinary day of their lives and never once thought to be grateful for. For a single heartbeat, she understood exactly what she had been missing without ever once knowing its name. She would have traded the rest of them away to keep it. She heard a gasp ripple outward from the wolves nearest them. They felt it too. They could smell what she could not, the sudden flare of a true bond, catching like a struck match, and 300 heads turned to follow the king's stare to its source, and found there only the corpse washer, the foundling, the empty girl who carried ash. For one heartbeat, Theron's face was open. She would spend the next year trying to forget what she saw in it, because it looked impossibly like grief. Then it closed like a slammed door. No, the king said. The word fell into the silence and broke it. He turned his back on her, so sharply. His cloak snapped. No, there is no bond here. His voice climbed, hard and carrying, pitched to reach the rafters and every wolf beneath them. Did you all feel that? That is what a trick feels like. That is what it feels like when something hollow tries to wear the shape of something true. He looked at her again, and now his eyes were flat as river stones. You are silent born. You have no wolf. You have no name beyond the one the kennel mistress gave you out of pity, and you reached for me. Your Majesty, she whispered. I didn't. Be quiet. He said it the way one swats an insect. Then, to the hall, with a curl of disgust on his mouth, she would see every time she shut her eyes, for a year afterward. Noted well, the dead tender mistook proximity for destiny. There is no creature in this room less worthy to stand beside an alpha. Remove her from my sight. The warm, impossible thing did not fade gently when he said it. It tore. She felt it rip loose from somewhere behind her sternum and go cold all at once, and she nearly folded over the bowl of ash at the suddenness of it, the having and the losing crammed into the same single minute of her life. 19 years with nothing in that place, and then everything, and then a wound. The laughter started somewhere in the middle of the crowd, and it spread. It was not kind laughter. It was the relieved, vicious laughter of 300 people who had just been handed permission to despise something, and they took it gladly, the way the well-fed always take a little extra. Soraya stood inside the noise of it, and felt every gaze land on her like thrown stones, and the bowl of ash trembled in her hands, and the worst part, the part that hollowed her out worse than the king's words, was the quiet voice inside her that said, "You always knew." He only said out loud what you have always known. She had built her whole life on that knowledge. She had packed it down hard and stood on it like flooring, and she had told herself it could not hurt her anymore. She had been wrong. It turned out there was a difference between believing a thing in the privacy of your own skull and hearing it spoken in a king's carrying voice, while 300 of your own kind howled with the joy of it. The first you could survive. The second went somewhere much deeper, and it stayed. A guard took her arm. She did not resist. As she was steered toward the side passage, she passed close enough to the dais to see the king's second, the beta called Bram, standing rigid at Theron's shoulder. Bram was not laughing. Bram was looking at the king with an expression she had no name for, white-faced and furious and somehow afraid, and the king would not look back at him. She told herself she imagined it. She told herself a lot of things that night. What she did not imagine, what she would only understand much later, was the man standing at the back of the hall in a traveler's gray, a guest from a far pack who watched the whole thing with the still attention of a hawk watching a field. He did not laugh either. When the king denounced her, the stranger's mouth curved, slow and satisfied, and he slipped out into the dark before the rites resumed, carrying away the one piece of knowledge the king had spent everything to bury. He had come a long way to learn it. He would travel a longer way still to use it, and he was in no hurry at all. The way the patient are never in a hurry. Some debts are sweeter for the keeping. He would let this one ripen a while. The cold passage swallowed Soraya. The laughter faded behind the closing door. She set the bowl of ash down on the stones with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and she did not weep, because weeping was a thing you did when you expected better. She had stopped expecting better around the time she learned to walk, but expecting nothing was not the same as feeling nothing. She was discovering, and no one had ever bothered to explain the difference to her. She was learning it now, at 19, alone on the cold floor of a side passage with a bowl of ash going gray at her feet. 1 year from that night, this same hall would fall silent for her again. But the next time, every wolf in it would go down on one knee. She just had no way yet of knowing it. They left the dead at the river door, and the dead never laughed at her. So Soraya had decided long ago that she preferred their company to the living's. She had been left at that same door herself. 19 years passed, a midwinter morning, a basket on the threshold of the death house, because there was nowhere lower to leave a child, and whoever bore her had wanted her gone past all hope of return. The kennel mistress had taken her, in the way you, taken a stray, you fully intend to drown, and then somehow never do. She had been named Soraya after a word in an old tongue that meant the star that rises last, which Soraya had always suspected was less a blessing than a joke about how long anyone had expected her to last at all. She had lasted. Silent-born children mostly did not. A wolf came to a pup somewhere between the first breath and the 7th winter. And when it came, you felt it arrive. A second heartbeat, a warmth, a self inside the self. Soraya's never came. She had waited for it with the focused, secret hunger of a child who believes that being whole will make her loved, and the wolf had not come, and she had grown up scentless in a world of noses, invisible in a world that knew its own by smell. To the pack, she was a hollow at the center of a girl, useful for the dead, because the dead did not care that she was empty, and because no wolf, with a living self, wanted to spend their days washing the cold limbs of the gone. So she washed them. She closed their eyes and combed their fur and folded their human hands and sang them the going songs in her plain, unmagical voice. And she was good at it, and no one had ever once thanked her. There was a kind of peace in the work that she had never confessed to a living soul, because she suspected it would frighten them worse than her empty scent already did. The dead asked nothing of her. They did not flinch from her hands or check the air around her for the second self that wasn't there. In the long, quiet hours of the death house, She was simply a pair of careful hands and a plain, low voice. Neither hollow nor whole, just useful, just present, just there. It was the nearest thing to belonging she had ever been permitted, and it was built entirely out of the gone. The morning after the claiming, she went to work as she always did, because the alternative was to lie in her cot in the death house loft and listen to the pack wake up into a world where the funniest thing that had happened in years was her. It was worse than she had braced for. The whispers found her before she reached the well. A cluster of young wolves at the water saw her coming and did not even lower their voices. That's her, the one who thought she could mate the king. A girl Soraya had once nursed through a fever, years back, when no one else would touch a sick pup, looked her dead in the face and turned her shoulder. By the time Soraya filled her buckets, someone had drawn a crude thing in the mud by the death house door. A stick king and a stick girl with a great red X scratched between them, and underneath it a single word in the common script. Quote, "Hollowed too." She stood and looked at it for a while. Then she scrubbed it out with the side of her boot, slowly, thoroughly, the way she did everything, and she carried her water inside, and she did not let her face do anything at all. It was a skill she had spent 19 years perfecting, the art of letting her face do nothing. You learned it early when you were the thing the pack used to feel better about itself. A blank face gave them nothing to push against. A blank face was a wall, and walls, unlike girls, could not be made to crumple in front of an audience. She wore hers all the way up the death house steps, and she did not take it off until the door was shut behind her, and there was no one left. She had to perform her own survival for. It was Damaris who came to make sure the lesson had landed. Damaris was highborn, a cousin of the king's late mother, all silver hair, and a scent the other wolves spoke of, like it was a kind of music, and she arrived at the death house an hour past dawn, with two of her friends and a basket of the king's own white flour, as if she had a reason to be in the lowest building in the hold. She did not. She had come for the pleasure of it. "I wanted to see how you were keeping," Damaris said. Stepping over the threshold she would normally not have soiled her shoes to cross, her nose wrinkling at the cold, clean smell of the place. "After your great evening." "We were all so concerned." "I'm well," said Soraya. "Are you?" Damaris drifted to the long stone table, ran one finger along its edge, found it spotless, and looked faintly disappointed. "You know, I almost felt for you, truly. To want a thing so far above you that you'd embarrass yourself in front of the whole pack reaching for it." She turned. Her smile was lovely, and it had teeth in it. "But then I thought, no. It's a mercy, really, what he did. Now you'll never have to wonder. The king himself, before 300 witnesses, told you exactly what you are. There's a sort of gift in that. Most of us never get told so plainly." One of the friends laughed. Soraya set down the cloth she was holding. She was so tired, suddenly in a place far below her bones, the deep tiredness of being told what she was, over and over, by people who had never once thought to ask. And she felt something she did not have a name for yet. Something that was not grief and was not shame. Something with an edge. "You came all the way down to the death house," Soraya said quietly, "to tell me I should be grateful. That's a long walk for a small errand. Were you worried I'd recover too quickly, without your help?" The laughter stopped. Damaris's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "Careful," she said, all the silk gone out of her voice. "I'm always careful," said Soraya. "It's the only thing I've ever been allowed to be." She picked the cloth back up. "I have work. The dead don't keep, and they're better mannered than most. You can see yourself out the way you came in." It was a small thing. It changed nothing. Damaris swept out with her flowers and her friends and a parting look that promised the cost of those few words would be collected later. With interest, and Soraya stood alone in the cold room, with her heart slamming and her hands not quite steady, and understood that she had just done something she had never done before in her whole erased life. She had refused to disappear, It frightened her more than Damaris had when she let herself think about it. For 19 years, disappearing had been the whole of her safety. You did not become a target if you were never quite there. And in the space of a single morning, she had scrubbed a slur off her own threshold, and then looked a high-born wolf in the eye and made her flinch, and some old careful instinct in her was already screaming that she had just made herself visible in a hold where being visible had never once cost her anything but blood. That was the first morning. There were a great many more of them. The year that followed taught Soraya exactly how long a pack will keep its appetite for one small cruelty, which is to say, as long as it likes. Damaris found new reasons to come down to the death house. The children kept the drawing in the mud fresh. She endured it, head down, face a wall, and underneath the enduring, the new thing that had looked a highborn in the eye went on, quietly refusing to lie back down. She did not know, that whole long year, that something in the hold had also refused to lie down. A death here, a death there, hushed and blamed on the damp and the bad air. Nothing for a death house girl to trouble herself over. She washed the ones they brought her and noticed nothing, because no one had yet taught her what there was to notice. She learned on a gray morning, not quite a year after the claiming, when the bell began to ring. Not the rising bell, not the moot bell. The death bell, 3 strokes, and a pause and 3 strokes again, the call that summoned her and her alone, but it was ringing wrong, too fast. Too many hands on the rope, and underneath it she could hear something she had never once heard rise from the living quarters of the hold in all her years. Screaming, Soraya was already moving, out the river door and up the long stair, with her skirts in her fists, because whatever had happened, someone was dead, and dead was the one country where she was never a stranger. She did not yet know that what waited for her at the top of the stair was not a death she could wash and sing and fold away. It was the first one. And it was wrong in a way that would take the rest from her, one by one, unless somebody who cast no shadow learned in time how to stand in the dark and see. The dead wolf in the upper court was named Idrin, and Soraya had folded his father's hands not 2 winters past, and she knew the moment she saw him that this was nothing she had words for. He had died, mid-shift. That was the first wrongness. A wolf's body knew how to be a wolf or how to be a man, and in death it chose one and held it, the way a held breath finally releases. Idrin had died, caught between the two, neither shape finished, every line of him gone, still in a way that nature did not permit, as if something had reached inside him and quieted the turning halves of his self in the middle of their change. And his eyes were open, and they held none of the soft, gray peace of an honest death. There was no light left in them at all. Only a strange, deep, dark, cold and patient, and wrong, as though something had reached in and drawn every trace of warmth out of him, and left that quiet emptiness behind. The crowd had pulled back into a wide ring. No one would go near him. 2 of the king's guards stood between the body and the pack, with their hands on their blades, and no idea what to do with them. Soraya knelt by him. She heard the intake of breath behind her, the murmur. She touched it, the hollow girl touched it, and she ignored them, because that was the one true freedom of being nothing. Nothing had nothing to lose. She did what she always did. She looked. She laid 2 fingers against the cold ruin of Edrin's throat, and she leaned close, and she breathed in, and there it was. Soraya could not smell the way the pack smelled. 19 years of being told so. But she had spent every one of those years among the dead, and the dead had taught her that there are more ways to know a thing than the obvious one. And so when she leaned close to Idrin's locked and lightless face, what she found was not a scent at all. It was an absence, a cold place, a hole in the world, the exact shape of a wolf, as if his self had not departed in the natural way, but had been drawn out through a wound she could not see, pulled away into somewhere, leaving behind only this caught and frozen husk. She had felt that absence once before. She felt it every morning, faintly in the mirror. The thought arrived sideways and would not leave. All her life, the pack had described her in the language of lack, a girl with a hole where her wolf should be, and she had learned to think of herself the same way, as a thing defined by what was missing from it. But, kneeling over Idrin, she felt the absence in him, and the absence in her, recognize one another. Two empty rooms, with a door between, and for the first time it occurred to her that an absence was not the same as a nothing. An absence had edges, an absence could be felt, and a thing that could be felt could perhaps be followed. You shouldn't be near that. The voice was low and rough, and came from directly above her. And Soraya looked up the length of a great deal of grey wool into the face of the oldest wolf in Vielmore. They called her Sigrun, and the pack feared her in the particular way it feared things it could not categorize. She kept the lore and the old records, and a hut at the wood's edge that mothers told their pups to stay away from. Soraya had carried more than one body past that hut. They had never spoken. He died wrong, Soraya said. It was not what she had meant to say. Something moved in Sigrun's lined face. Yes, she said. He did. She looked at the ring of frightened wolves, at the guard, at the still cold thing on the stones, and her mouth thinned. On your feet, girl. Walk with me. Now, while they're all too busy being afraid to notice where the corpse washer goes, they went to the hut at the wood's edge, and Sigrun barred the door, and lit no lamp, and told her. There's an old sickness, the lorekeeper said, lowering herself onto a stool among the hanging bundles of dried things Soraya could not name. Older than this pack. Older than the hold. The records I keep don't have a true name for it. The ones who wrote them were too afraid to write it down plain, so they called it the Wither, the way you'd call a wolf you feared by a soft name so it wouldn't hear you. Her dark eyes fixed on Soraya. It doesn't kill the body. It takes the wolf. It reaches down the bond threads that bind a pack together, wolf to wolf to wolf, and it follows them home, and it pulls the self out, and leaves the husk. What you found on the stones up there, that is a wolf that had its soul drawn out through the very thing that makes it pack. Soraya's mouth had gone dry. Then everyone bonded to him, is a thread it can climb. Sigrun nodded slowly. It spreads by nearness and by blood and by love. The closer the bond, the easier the road. A pack is a net of such threads, child. That is our great strength. And against the wither, it is the rope we have all hanged ourselves with. She paused. It will take this hold apart wolf by wolf, and the highborn will call it a fever, and forbid the word so the people don't panic. And by the time they can no longer pretend, it will be in every house. Why are you telling me? The question came out cracked. I tend the dead. I can't. I have no wolf. I can't even. She stopped. Sigrun was watching her with the patient, terrible attention of someone who has waited a long time to be understood. You have no wolf, the old woman agreed softly. You cast no scent. You have no bond thread running out of you to any living soul in this. Hold. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to almost nothing. The wither climbs the threads, girl. It hunts down the bonds. And you do not have one for it to find. A long breath. There has not been a silent born in Valemore in 4 generations. The pack has spent your whole life teaching you that you are a hollow, a lack, a nothing. And it never once occurred to a single one of them that in a year the net would catch fire, and the only wolf the fire cannot reach would be the girl who was never tied into it. The hut was very quiet. Somewhere outside, far off, the death bell had started again. 2 strokes this time, then a third. That's another, Sigrun said, not moving. Already. You see how fast. She reached out and took Soraya's scentless hand in her dry old fingers, the first time in 19 years anyone had taken it without needing something from it. I cannot stand against this. I am old, and I am tied into the net like all the rest. But you can walk through it untouched, and you can find the taint before it blooms, because you have lived your whole life learning to feel an absence in a room full of presence. Her grip tightened. Tell no one yet. They will either fear you for it or use you up. Let me think on how to keep you alive while you save them. Can you do that? Soraya looked down at the old hand around hers. She thought about the stick figures in the mud. She thought about 300 wolves laughing. She thought about a king who had looked at her with grief and then named her, before the whole pack, the most worthless thing in his hall. They hate me, she said. It was not a refusal. It was just true. I know, said Sigrun. Save them, anyway. That's the part that will matter. And then, because the old woman could not have known what those words would do to a girl who had been waiting 19 years for one single reason, to deserve the air she breathed, Soraya nodded. She was almost to the door when Sigrun spoke again, and the new note in her voice stopped Soraya cold with her hand on the bar. One more thing, girl, and then you go. The lorekeeper's eyes had gone distant and sharp at once. When you knelt by that body, I watched the way it was made. That wolf did not take the wither by chance, the way the old records describe. There was a mark cut into the stone beneath him, a sign. Someone put it there. She held Soraya's gaze. The wither doesn't arrive on its own, not this time. Someone has carried it to our gates and is feeding it our people on purpose. And I have only ever known one creature in all the world who hates this Hold's king enough to do it. Soraya's heart was pounding. Who? But Sigrun only shook her head, her face shut tight as a fist, and said, Not yet. First, you learn to walk in the dark. Then I tell you whose dark it is. For 11 days, Soraya hunted the wither through the hold like a ghost hunting ghosts, and learned that the hardest part of saving people who despise you is getting close enough to do it. She could feel the taint, now that she knew the shape of it. That cold absence, that hole in the warm, crowded world of the living, blooming, faint, and gray around a wolf days before the cold ever reached their eyes. She found it first in an old male called Pell, who hauled water, a chill the size of a coin in the middle of his chest. She did not know yet how to pull it out. But Sigrun had given her the older knowledge, the lore the records kept, that the wither spread by the bond threads, and so a wolf caught early, cut off, kept apart, made to sleep alone and touch no one, could sometimes burn the cold out on their own before it rooted. So Soraya learned to lie. She told Pell the death house needed a strong back for a season, and that there was a cot and 3 meals in it, and she kept him apart, and on the 9th day, the gray coin in his chest guttered and went out, and he was the first wolf in living memory to thank the silent-born girl for anything. He did not know what she had saved him from, she did not tell him, but he told the next one, and the one after that, when she came with her strange certain knowledge, and her insistence on solitude, did not turn their shoulder quite so fast. It was not respect. Not yet. It was the first thin crack in a lifetime of being nothing, and Soraya, who had never been given anything, hoarded it like a miser. She caught herself returning to it at odd hours. The memory of Pell's rough thank you, girl, turning it over the way you would turn a coin you weren't certain was real. It was such a small thing to matter so much. She was almost ashamed of how much it mattered, and she went on letting it. Then the wither reached the king's own household, and everything she had been building in the dark was dragged into the light. It came for a boy. His name was Wick, 8 years old, the son of a hearth cook, and he had the run of the hold the way small loud children do, and he was beloved, which meant his small body was tied by 100 bright threads to half the people in the keep. When Soraya felt the cold open up in him across a crowded courtyard, a wide, fast, already rooted cold, far worse than Pell's coin, she did the unforgivable thing. She crossed the courtyard in front of everyone, and she took the king's cook's beloved son by both shoulders, and she said loudly, in front of 40 witnesses, "This child cannot sleep in the keep tonight. He cannot be touched by anyone he loves. Bring him to the death house, and do it now or by the new moon. He will be the next one screaming." The courtyard went silent. It was exactly the wrong way to do it, and she knew it even as the words left her, but the cold in the boy was so deep and moving so fast that there had been no time to be clever, and now she stood in the open, with her scentless hands on the king's cook's son, and her death house reputation, and 40 wolves staring at her, like she had pulled a blade. "Your hands off, my boy." The cook was already moving, terror making her vicious. "Guards, guards, the hollow girl's gone mad, she's laid hands on." "Hold." The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It came from the gallery above the courtyard, and Soraya felt it go through the gathered pack like a hand drawn down a harp, every wolf there, turning and lowering their eyes at once. And she looked up before she could stop herself, and there he was. Theron. She had not been this close to him since the night he ruined her. A year of glimpses across courtyards, the back of a dark head, the deliberate architecture of never once being in a room together. And now he stood at the gallery rail, looking down at her, with her hands on a sick child, and his face was the flat, closed thing she remembered. Except his knuckles were white on the rail. Except, for just a moment, his eyes moved over her face, the way a starving man's eyes move over a window, full of bread, fast and hungry, and immediately ashamed. She did not understand it. She filed it away with the grief she had seen a year ago, in the place where she kept the things about the king that did not add up. It was becoming a crowded place. That. A year ago, there had been only the one thing in it, the grief on his face. In the half-second before the cruelty, now there were others. The white knuckles on the rail. The way his own guards had let go of their blades the instant he spoke. As though even they had been waiting a long time to be told this was real. She had the sudden, uneasy sense of standing in a story she had only ever been shown a single page of, and of that page, having been chosen with great care. "Explain yourself," Theron said to her directly. The first words he had spoken to her in a year, and they landed in a courtyard, holding its breath. And Soraya, who should have been afraid, found that she was not, because the cold in the boy under her hands was spreading even now, even as they all stared, and there was simply no room left in her for fear when a child was dying. So she lifted her chin and looked the Alpha King of Vilemore full in the face, the way the least worthy creature in the room was never supposed to. "There's a sickness in your hold, your majesty," she said clearly. "It isn't a fever. It's killing wolves in their own skins, and your court is calling it bad air, so no one panics. I can feel it before it shows. This boy has it, and it's deep, and if he sleeps tonight beside anyone he loves, it will follow him into them, while he dreams." She did not look away. "You can throw me out again, you're very good at it. But throw the boy out with me first, or by your own hearth, you'll be burning children before the month is done." Behind her, the cook had gone silent. Around her, 40 wolves were no longer looking at Soraya like she was mad. They were looking at the king, and waiting. And into that waiting, Soraya watched something cross Theron's face that she could not have predicted in 100 years. He looked, for one naked instant, relieved, as if some private dread he had carried alone for a long time had finally been spoken aloud by someone else, so that he no longer had to hold the whole weight of it by himself. "Bram," the king said, without taking his eyes off her. The beta was already at the rail. "Sire, the Death House girl is to have whatever she asks for. The boy goes where she says. Quarter the cook, somewhere. She can watch her son without touching him." A muscle moved in Theron's jaw. "And the next courtier who says the word fever in my hearing will answer to me for it." The courtyard erupted in low, astonished noise. Soraya barely heard it. She was already turning the boy toward the river stair, her mind racing ahead to the cold thing rooted in his small chest, and how in the gods' names she was going to pull it out when she had never managed more than coaxing the shallow ones to fade, and so she almost missed it. Bram caught up to her on the stair. The king's second, who, a year ago, had stood white and furious at his master's shoulder and would not laugh. He pressed a folded paper into her scentless hand, and under the noise of the boy and the cook, and the whole upended hold, he said 5 words very low and very fast. "He never stopped watching you." Then he was gone back up the stair, And Soraya stood on the cold stones, with a dying child's hand in one fist and a folded paper in the other. And she did not open it, not yet, because her heart was beating so hard she could not have read the words. He never stopped watching you. She thought of grief in a cruel face. She thought of white knuckles on a gallery rail. She thought of a man who had called her hollow before 300 wolves, and then, a year later, said whatever she asks for, in a voice that shook. And for the very first time, standing in the place where they left the dead, Soraya let herself wonder whether the night that broke her had been a cruelty at all, or whether it had been something else entirely, something with a shape she could not yet see, hidden in the dark, the way the wither hid. Waiting for a girl who cast no shadow to come close enough to find it, she put the paper in her pocket. She took the boy down to the river door. The reading would have to wait. She had a soul to pull back out of the dark first, and she was almost certain, now, that it would not be the last one. The boy did not want to be saved by the girl who handled the dead, and Soraya could not find it in herself to blame him. He sat where she put him, on the cot in the warmest corner of the death house, with 3 braziers ringed around him, and he watched her with the wide, flat terror of a child who has been told his whole short life that this room is where you go when you are finished, and who cannot understand why he has been carried here while his heart is still beating. His mother had wept and clawed at the guards when they kept her back at the river door. Soraya had not let her in. She could not let her in. The cook loved her son with 100 bright threads, and every one of them was a road the cold thing inside him would take straight into her chest if she so much as held his hand. "You're going to be cold tonight," Soraya told the boy, kneeling so her plain empty face was level with his. "Colder than you have ever been. It is going to feel like the cold is alive and it wants you, and it is going to tell you to let go." She took his small hands in both of hers. "Don't you listen to a word it says. I'm going to hold on. I am very, very good at holding on to people. It's the only thing I've ever been good at, and I have never once lost one who was still warm. Do you believe me?" He didn't, but he held on. The wither rose in him after the second bell, the way Sigrun had said it would, and it was worse than anything Soraya had braced for. The cold rose up out of him in a deepening tide, pouring off his small body and reaching for the warm, crowded world the way it always reached, out along the bonds, hunting a thread to climb home on. It found her hands instead. And in Soraya, there was no thread, no wolf, no scent, no second self, no bond running out of her to any living soul in all the world. The cold rushed into her looking for the road that everyone else's love laid down for it, and it found a hollow, an absence, with edges, a dead end, the exact shape of a girl who had been told her whole life she was nothing. It poured into her emptiness, and it kept pouring, expecting to come out somewhere, to climb on, to spread. There was nowhere for it to go, so it raged. It clawed and froze and hunted inside the dark of her. And Soraya knelt on the stone floor of the death house, with a child's hands locked in hers, and let it. She had spent 19 years being a place the pack poured its contempt into, and got nothing back. She knew, better than anyone living, exactly how to be a thing that swallows what is given and does not break. The cold filled her until her teeth chattered and her vision whitened at the edges, and her own heart slowed to a deep, painful crawl. And still she did not let go of the boy, and still the wither found no thread out of her, and somewhere past the middle of that endless night it began, at last, to tire. By the gray hour before dawn, it guttered like a candle drowning in its own wax. By full light, it was gone. Wick slept. His chest rose and fell, even and warm, and when Soraya finally peeled her stiff blue fingers from his, she saw that his eyes, when she lifted one lid to check, were the soft ordinary brown of a living child. She had pulled a soul back out of the dark. She had done the thing the death house was the opposite of. And she could not stand up to celebrate it, because the cold the wither had left in her did not fully thaw for 2 days, and she spent both of them shaking under every blanket she owned, learning the price of what she could do. It was the cook who found her there, come to see the son she'd been promised was alive. She stood in the doorway of the death house loft and looked at the gray-faced girl wrapped in blankets who had taken her boy's dying into her own body all night long, and the cook of the king's own kitchen who would not have met Soraya's eyes a week ago. Crossed the room and knelt at the side of her cot and pressed her forehead to Soraya's scentless hand like she was something holy. "I don't have a wolf," Soraya said stupidly, because she did not know what else to do with it. "No," said the cook, weeping, "you have something else." Word of that went through the hold faster than the wither ever had. The death house girl could pull the sickness out, the hollow one, the unchosen one, the joke from the claiming. She walked into the cold places no healer dared, and came back carrying the living. By the end of the week, there were 3 families camped at the river door who would not have spat on her a month before, and Pell stood guard over her sleep without being asked, and somewhere in the hold, the word for her had begun, very quietly, to change. It was on the second night of the shaking that she finally remembered the folded paper in her pocket, and opened it and read the words Bram had pressed into her hand. "He has always seen you. Come." Beneath it, an hour and a place. The old mews where the king's hawks had not been kept since his father's day. After the 3rd bell. "Tell no one?" She told no one. She went. He was already there when she came, a tall darkness against the broken moonlight through the rafters, and the moment she crossed the threshold, the warm, impossible thing she had felt exactly once in her life, a year ago in a crowded hall, rose up and closed around her ribs all over again. It should not have been possible. She had no wolf to feel a bond with, but she felt it. The pull, the certainty, the door swinging open onto a room she had been told all her life did not exist inside her, and across the dark of the empty mews, she saw Theron go rigid as a struck post, and knew, with a falling sensation, that he felt it too. No greeting. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it gently in a long while. "Whatever you're doing down there, the cook says you go blue. Bram says you didn't rise for 2 days. A muscle worked in his jaw. "It has to stop. People are dying," Soraya said. "I am aware that people are dying. Then it can't stop." She lifted her chin, the way she had learned to in a courtyard a week ago. "You've known about the wither for months." Bram's note. "You've known, and you've said nothing. And you've let your court call it a fever while it eats your people house by house. Why?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. He turned half away, and the moonlight caught the deep, bruised exhaustion under his eyes, the hollows in a face that should have been a decade from looking like that, and she set it beside the grief from the claiming and the white knuckles on the gallery rail, in the part of her that had begun against her own better sense. To suspect the king was a stranger and sadder man than he let the hold believe. "Because the moment I name it," Theron said quietly, "the one who sent it knows I understand. And the moment he knows I understand." He stopped himself, hard, like a man catching his own hand before it touched a flame. "It does not matter. You need to know only this. You can do what no one in this hold can do, and I cannot lose that, and I cannot lose you, so you will let me help you survive it. Bram will bring you to me. We will do this in the dark, where no one sees. And you will never, ever tell a living soul that the King of Vilemore needs the dead house girl for anything at all." His eyes found hers across the ruined mews, and there was something terrible and pleading in them. "Can you give me that?" "Your silence. I have asked for very little in my life. I am asking you for this." Soraya looked at the king who had broken her before 300 wolves, and who was now standing in a hawkless mews at the 3rd bell begging a foundling for her silence, like it was water in a drought, and she understood that she had been telling herself the wrong story about that night for a year, and that the right one was hidden somewhere in the dark behind his eyes, in the place he had nearly burned his own hand reaching toward. "I'll keep your secret," she said. "I'm very good at keeping things that no one wants seen. I've had practice." It was not until she was halfway back to the death house, her heart still pounding from the pull of him, that she found the second sigil. It was cut fresh into the underside of the mews door, where her shoulder had brushed it, going in the same deliberate mark Sigrun had found beneath Idrin's body, and the wood around it was still pale and weeping sap. It had not been there when she arrived. Someone had carved it while she stood 3 feet away talking to the king. Someone had been close enough to hear every word. For 11 nights, the wall between them came down a stone at a time, and Soraya was fool enough to think it might come down for good. It was always in the dark, always in some forgotten corner of the hold that the court had no reason to walk, and it was always supposed to be only the work. Bram would come for her after the 3rd bell. Theron would be waiting with a map of the hold spread on whatever surface they could find, the houses where the cold had bloomed, marked in his own careful hand, and they would plan the next night's hunt, which family to move, which child to keep apart, where the wither would reach next, if it kept to the pattern they were slowly learning to read. He had a soldier's mind for it. She had the only senses that could find the thing. Between them, for the first time since it began, the wither stopped being a doom that fell from the sky and became an enemy with a shape that could be fought. But you cannot spend 11 nights bent over the same small circle of candlelight with a person and keep the wall fully built. She learned that he was funny in a dry, buried way when he forgot to guard himself. She learned that he carried the name of every wolf who had died of the wither, all of them, in order, and said them sometimes under his breath, like a man counting a debt. She learned that he watched her hands when she talked, and that when she caught him at it, he looked away too fast, like a boy. And once, near dawn, when she had gone gray and swaying after a hard pull, she had felt him cross the room and stop just behind her, close enough that the warmth of him soaked through the cold the wither had left in her, close enough that the pull between them sang so loud she could hardly breathe, and he had reached out, and she had thought, now, finally, he will touch me, and he had pulled the blanket up over her shoulders instead, and stepped back, and said her name, once, low and wrecked, like it cost him something to say at all. Soraya, that was all. But no one in 19 years had ever said her name, like it was a thing they were afraid of wanting. She let herself hope. She knew better, and she did it anyway, because she was 19 and starved, and the most powerful wolf in the realm said her name in the dark like a wound. That was her mistake. She would not make it again. The blow came on the 12th night, and it came wearing Bram's face. He brought her to the mews as always, but the king's second was grey and grim, and Theron was not bent over a map when she came in. He was standing very straight in the center of the empty floor, and his face had gone back to the flat closed thing from the claiming, the river stone eyes. The door slammed shut, and the sight of it stopped her cold in the doorway. "This ends tonight," Theron said. Soraya's heart dropped. "The wither doesn't end tonight. We're not close to. Not the wither. This," he gestured, a short, violent motion that took in the mews, the candle, her, the 11 nights, all of it. "You will not come here again. Bram will not bring you. The work is finished. People are still dying. Then they will die." His voice did not change at all, and that was the most frightening part. "Whatever you are to this hold, you will be it from a distance. You will not be seen near me. You will not be brought to me in the dark. You will go back to your death house, and you will keep to it. And if our paths cross in daylight, you will lower your eyes like every other wolf, and you will pass me by. A breath. That is an order from your king." She should have lowered her eyes then. A year ago, she would have. The silent-born girl who had spent her life learning to take what she was given and not break, would have folded the way she always folded and carried her ash away into the dark. But she was not entirely that girl anymore. She had held a child's dying in her own body all night long and won. She had felt 3 families bow their heads to her at the river door. She had heard the most dangerous wolf alive say her name, like a prayer he was ashamed of. And so instead of lowering her eyes, Soraya crossed the floor of the mews and stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the pole roar up between them, close enough to watch his jaw clench against it. And she said, very quietly. No. The same thing I feel. I have no wolf, and I feel it, which should be impossible. And you have known what it is since the first moment, since the hall, since you looked at me across 300 people and stopped walking. You feel it right now. So, before you send me away into the cold, a second time, you are going to look me in the face and tell me what I am to you, because I have spent a year believing your answer was nothing, and I no longer think that you were telling the truth. For one suspended moment, the wall was gone. She saw the whole of it surge up behind his eyes, the want and the grief and the year of it, and she saw his hand twitch at his side, like it would reach for her against his every command, and she understood that if she just held still, just waited, the truth would break out of him, here in the ruined mews. Then his face shut, final and absolute, and he gave her the cruelest gift he had. "You are a tool," Farron said, each word laid down flat and deliberate as stones on a grave. "A useful one. Nothing the bond chooses is ever truly nothing. There, I lied. At the claiming, and I will not apologize for it. But do not mistake a lock recognizing a key for a king choosing a foundling. I needed your gift. I am done." He stepped back from her, and the warmth went with him, and the cold rushed into the space where he had been. "Go home, Soraya. There is nothing here for you. There never was." She did not weep. She had told herself a year ago on the floor of a side passage that weeping was a thing you did when you expected better, and she had let herself expect better for 11 nights. And look, so she did not give him her tears. She gave him her silence the way she'd promised, and she turned and walked out of the mews with her spine straight and her face a wall, and she did not let it crack until she was 3 corridors away with no one left to perform her survival. For what she did not see, because she did not look back, was the King of Valemore sink down onto the cold floor of the empty mews the instant the door closed behind her, and put his face in his hands, and shake. She found out later why he'd done it. Bram told her in the end. That afternoon, a hawk had come in from the border carrying no message at all. Only a scrap of pale cloth tied to its leg. A scrap cut from the apron Soraya wore at the river door, taken from her line where it dried, by hands that had been close enough to take it. It was not a threat, it did not need words. It was a way of saying, "I see her." And Theron, who had spent a year and the whole of his good name keeping one particular pair of eyes from ever landing on her, had understood in that moment that the 11 nights of candlelight had undone it all, and that the only thing he could still do to keep her alive was to make those watching eyes believe, beyond any doubt, that the Death House girl meant nothing to him at all. He had broken her a second time to save her life. She did not know that yet. All she knew in the cold days that followed was that the pole had not died with the wall he'd thrown back up, that the absence of him was its own slow sickness, a cold with no wither in it that ached in the hollow of her chest and would not thaw. She stopped sleeping. She stopped eating much. The families she had saved brought her bread. She could not swallow and sat with her anyway, and Pell guarded a door that no longer needed guarding, and the pack that had begun to love her watched the Death House girl fade by inches and did not understand why. Sigrun understood. The old lorekeeper came on the 5th gray day and barred the door and lit no lamp, the way she had the first time, and she looked at Soraya's hollowed face for a long moment. "It's the bond, starving," Sigrun said, "denied on both ends. It will kill you slower than the wither, but it will kill you." She lowered herself onto the cot. "I told you, a year passed, that I would teach you to walk in the dark, and then I would tell you whose dark it is." Her old eyes were very steady. "It's time you knew the rest. Sit. This is a long and a terrible story, and the king is not the villain of it, and by the end you are going to wish he were. His name is Varric," Sigrun said, "and once, a long time ago, he and your king loved each other like brothers. That is where every truly terrible thing begins, not with hate, with love that broke." She told it plainly, in the dark, and Soraya did not interrupt once. Set her hat. 12 years passed before Theron was king. when he was only the old king's heir and Varric was the heir of Sarnhold across the grey border. The two packs had been at peace, and the two young wolves had ridden each other's lands and drunk at each other's fires, and called one another brother in the way the young swear things they believe will last. And Varric had a mate, a Sarnhold wolf named Nerys, his true bonded, the center of his whole sky. And then the peace broke, the way peace breaks, over grazing rights, and an insult, and a dead scout, and 100 small things that do not matter once the blood starts. The old king sent his heir to hold the border. Theron went. There was a night raid on a border village, Sigrun said. Ours, Sarnhold wolves in the dark, and Theron's spears in the dark to meet them, and no moon, and no way for any wolf alive to see whose throat was under his hands. Theron killed, in that dark, the way you kill when your own people are screaming behind you. And when the sun came up, the old woman stopped. When the sun came up, he found that one of the bodies his line had brought down in the black was Varric's mate. She had come with the raiders. No one knows why. To fight, to stop it, to find her own husband's brother and beg him to end it. No one will ever know now. Theron held her body in the dawn and understood what he had done, and there has not been a day since that he has set it down. She let that sit a moment in the dark. A wolf can carry a death, girl. We are made to. But Theron did not carry it. He swallowed it, and let it become the thing he believes about himself, that a king who cannot tell friend from foe in the black does not deserve to keep what he loves. He has spent 12 years certain that anything good will be torn out of his hands, because somewhere in that dawn he decided that it should be. Her voice was very quiet. That is the true wound, child. Varric did not make it. Varric only went looking for it, and found it waiting, and put his thumb in it. Soraya thought of a man counting names under his breath like a debt. She thought of grief on a cruel face. Varric did not go to war over it, Sigrun went on, and her voice dropped. That is what makes him what he is. War would have been clean. Varric looked at the brother who had taken the center of his sky, and he swore something older and patient, and far worse. He swore he would not kill Theron. He swore he would teach Theron exactly what he himself had been taught, that you live on, hollowed, after the thing you love most is taken slow in front of you, and you cannot stop it. He swore he would find whatever Theron came to love best in all the world, and he would take it apart by inches and make the king watch. Sigrun's hands had gone still. Then he vanished for 12 years to learn the kind of magic that can do it. The wither is not a plague, child. It is a husband's grief, made into a weapon and aimed. The muse, the candle, the 11 nights, the scrap of her own apron tied to a hawk's leg. At the claiming, Soraya said slowly, the bond flared. The whole hall felt it. Everyone knew in one moment exactly what the king of Vialmor loved most in all the world. Her voice had gone strange and quiet. And Varric has spies in every pack. He's always watching for it. For the king's heart to show its face. Yes, said Sigrun, very gently. So Theron killed it, in front of 300 people. As loud and as cruelly as he could. Soraya's eyes had filled, and she let them, and did not wipe them. He made the whole world believe I was the least worthy creature in the room. He made me believe it. Because the one thing he could not let happen was for Varric to look at the hall that night and see the truth, that the king had just found the one thing left in the world that could be taken from him. He chose your life over your heart, Sigrun said. He has done it twice now. He will tell you he would do it 100 times. And he is a fool, and he is wrong, and he has been wrong since the first night, because he never once thought to ask whether you would rather be safe and erased, or seen, and standing beside him, in the dark where the thing is. Soraya sat very still in the unlit room, while a year of her life turned over and showed her its other face. The grief on his face at the claiming, the white knuckles. He has always seen you, come. The blanket pulled up over her shoulders by a hand that would not let itself touch her. You are a tool, said flat as stones on a grave. by a man who had then sunk to the floor of the mews and shaken when she could not see. He had broken his own heart in half, twice, and called it protecting her, and never once asked what she wanted. Because that was the thing about being told all your life that you are nothing. Even the man who loved you most could come to believe that your safety was worth more than your say. And she knew that wound from the inside, didn't she? Not his, hers. She had been left at a door because someone long ago had decided she was a thing the world was better off not seeing. She had spent every year she could remember agreeing with them, making herself small, making herself useful, certain in her very bones that she did not get to take up room or ask for more than she was handed. Theron believed he did not deserve to keep what he loved. She believed she did not deserve to be the thing anyone loved at all. They had been given the same lie in two different shapes, and they had each spent their whole lives carrying it carefully, like something precious, like the truth. And underneath the grief, underneath the ache of the starving bond, something in Soraya, that had been told to be small, its entire life stood, slowly up, and refused. "He thinks he's saving me," she said. "He thinks he's saving you, by making me disappear. Twice, by deciding for me that I'd rather be alive and erased than fight." Her wet eyes had gone hard and bright. "You can't save someone by erasing them, Sagrin. I would know. I've been erased my whole life, by experts, and not one day of it was the same as being safe." She wiped her face now, once, with the heel of her hand, and stood. "I'm done being saved. I'm the only wolf in this. Hold the wither can't catch, and the man who made it is coming for everything I—" Her voice caught, and she let it, and pushed through, "for everyone I have left. I'm not going to hide in the death house while Theron breaks himself in half pretending he doesn't love me. I'm going to find the heart of this thing, and I'm going to put it out, and then I'm going to have words with my king." For the first time in the long, terrible telling, Sigrun smiled. "Then you'll need more than one pair of hands," the old woman said. "And as it happens, you have them. You only never noticed, because you spent so long believing no one would come if you called." She rose, her old joints cracking. "The cook will do anything for the girl who carried her son. Pell guards your door already. Half the river quarter owes you a life apiece, and they are frightened, and frightened people will follow the one person who isn't. And the king's own second slipped you a note in a courtyard with the whole hold watching, which is not a thing a beta does for a tool." She moved to the door and unbarred it. "Bram has wanted to fight this in the light for a year. Theron forbade it. Theron is not here. Shall we go and wake your allies? Star, that rises last?" Dawn is a foolish time to start a war, which is exactly why no one will expect it. Soraya stood in the dark and tried to take in the shape of the thing the old woman was describing. A girl with allies, a girl people would rise for, a girl at the front of something instead of swept quietly to its edge. It did not fit her. It was a coat cut for someone else's shoulders. But she thought of Wick's brown eyes opening in the gray light, and the cook's forehead pressed to her scentless hand, and Pell, asleep across her doorway with a blade he had never once been asked to bring. And she understood that the coat had been tailored to her for weeks now, quietly while she wasn't looking, one saved life at a time, and that the only soul left in the whole hold still, surprised to find her wearing it, was herself. They went out together into the gray before morning, the old lore-keeper and the girl who cast no shadow, and they were not halfway across the silent yard when the first scream tore open the dawn. It came from the high court, where the king's household slept. And then a second, and a third, from everywhere, at once. From every quarter of the hold, more screams than the Wither had ever raised in a single night, because Varric had grown tired of waiting, and grief made into a weapon does not announce itself. And the husband across the border had just opened his hand and let the whole carefully tended sickness bloom at once. Soraya stood frozen in the dawn for half a heartbeat, the screams of the dying rising on every side. Then the girl they had all laughed at picked up her skirts and ran toward them. Soraya ran toward the screaming. And for the first time in her life, the crowd did not close in front of her. It opened. Wolves she had pulled back from the dark stood gray-faced in their doorways, and when they saw her coming, they did not turn their shoulders. They pointed. "The High Court!" they cried. "It's everywhere. It's all at once." And she understood, even as she climbed, that this was no longer the patient bloom she had learned to read. One cold coin at a time, the whole web had been lit. She could feel the full shape of it for the first time, a vast freezing net thrown over the entire hold, every bond thread in the pack, alight and burning inward, all of it pulling toward one place. She came up into the High Court and found the center of the world. Theron was there, on his knees in the middle of the great court, with his household dying around him, and he was not fighting because there was nothing to fight. No throat to put his hands on, only the cold pouring down 1,000 invisible threads at once. And standing over him, untouched, calm as a man at his own hearth, was the traveler in gray from a year ago. He had Theron's own gray eyes. She had not expected the enemy to look so much like the man she loved. "There she is," said Varric, and he smiled and turned to the king on his knees. "You threw her to the dead house, brother. You called her the least worthy thing in your hall. And I almost believed you, almost, until I watched her walk into my gift, night after night, and carry your people back out of it, in her arms." His voice was almost gentle. "You should not have let me see her do that. A man only does that for one thing, in all the world. So now you will kneel there, and you will watch, while I take the last thing you love out of the world, 1 degree of cold at a time." He opened his hand toward Soraya, and the entire net turned. She felt it come 300 threads of stolen cold funneled onto a single point, and the point was her. It was the night with Wick, made vast, made monstrous, and it poured into her expecting to drown her. So Soraya did the only thing she had ever truly known how to do. She opened the hollow and let it all in. She did not brace against it the way you brace against a blow. She had never once beaten anything by being stronger than it. She had only ever survived by being a place that swallowed what it was given and did not break. And she made herself that place now, for the whole pack, at once, 300 bonds worth of grief weapon, pouring down into one wolfless girl who had been built her entire life. She understood at last, for exactly this. The cold rushed in and found no thread to climb, nowhere to go but down into a hollow it could not fill. But a hollow can be made to fill. And there was one thread the curse could still climb. The one Varric had aimed it down from the start. And it was not hers. It was Theron's, because the wither did not run on cold alone. It ran on grief, and on the oldest lie grief tells, that loss is a debt, and the loved thing was always owed to the dark. And kneeling there, watching the girl he had broken himself twice to protect die in front of him for his people, Theron believed that lie to his bones. Of course, she felt it move through him, down the thread, into the cold. Of course it ends this way. I do not get to keep what I love. I never have. This is the debt. This is what I deserve. And his agreement fed the weapon, and the cold in Soraya went past the bottom she did not have, and she began, at last, to die. So she spent what was almost the last of her, and she did not spend it on Varric. "Theron," she said. Her voice came out of her in a thread of fog. "Look at me, not at him. At me." His gray eyes found her, wrecked, drowning in his own old dark. "You think you deserve to lose me," Soraya said, and the words cost her everything she had left. "I know that wound. I have its twin. You believe you don't get to keep what you love, and I have believed every day of my whole life that I don't get to be the thing that's loved. We were handed the same lie in 2 shapes, you and I, and we have both carried it so carefully so long that we mistook it for the truth." The cold was at her teeth now, her sight whitening. "Stop paying it. Don't choose me to keep me safe. Don't choose me out of guilt, or debt, or to undo what you did in a hall a year ago. Choose me, because I'm yours, and you are mine, and neither of us ever had to earn the right to that. Choose me out loud, in front of all of them, and mean it. For one heartbeat, the whole court hung silent around the dying girl and the kneeling king. Then, Theron rose. He rose out of 12 years of believing he was a debtor, turned his back on the brother who had come to collect, and crossed the court to take Soraya's cold face in both his hands before every living soul in the hold. Not quietly. Not in a hawkless muse, at the third bell. He said it, so it reached the rafters and every wolf beneath them. The way he had once said, the cruelest thing she ever heard. "You are my mate," said the king of Valemore. "You were my mate in that hall a year ago, and I knew it, and I lied, and I have not had a single hour of peace since. You are the truest thing I have ever found, and I will not pay you to the dark, not for the debt, not for his grief, not for mine." His thumbs moved over her freezing cheeks. "I choose you. I should have chosen you in front of all of them the first night, and I will spend the rest of my life choosing you where every wolf alive can hear it, and the dark can starve. You are mine, and I am keeping you." The bond, denied for a year on both ends, snapped home. It did not feel like a wolf. She had half wondered whether at the very end she would finally feel the second self she'd been promised as a child and denied. She did not. What poured into her hollow was him, the whole warm weight of being chosen, of being seen, of being kept, and it went down into the bottomless cold and became the bottom. The hollow that had no floor finally had one, and the cold that had been falling forever finally had somewhere to land and stop and end. And the grief weapon, which ran on the conviction that love is a debt paid in loss, met two people who refused, in front of it, to owe a single thing, and it had nothing left to burn. The wither recoiled. It tore back up the threads the way it had come. Out of Soraya, out of the dying across the hold, 300 wolves gasping awake in their beds with the cold dark draining out of them, and it rushed home to the only grief left in the court still feeding it. It rushed home to Varric. He had time to look surprised. 12 years of sorrow honed into a blade, turned, now with nowhere to go but the hand that forged it, and the maker of the wither folded to the stones of the high court, with the whole of his own grief landing on him, all at once. Soraya pulled free of Theron's hands. She crossed the court on legs that should not have held her, past the staring pack, past the brother king who had killed, and the brother king who had been killing, and she knelt by Varric, the way she had knelt by every dead and dying thing in this hold for 19 years, because that was the one thing she had always been. Before she was a healer, or a mate, or a queen, she was the one who did not let the gone go unwitnessed. "Neres," she said softly, and watched the name go through him like the only warmth left in the world. "Her name was Neres, and you loved her, and it was not a debt, and it was never owed to the dart. No one ever sat with you in it. No one ever once let it just be grief instead of a weapon." She took his cold hand, the way she had taken a frightened boy's. "I'll sit with you. I sit with everyone. Even you." And as the last of the thing he had made drained out of him, Soraya bent her plain, unmagical voice to the man who had tried to end her whole world, and she sang him the going song, the same one she gave the lowest pauper and the loneliest dead, and Varric of Sarnhold went into the dark at last as something other than a monster, went as a husband, witnessed, grieved, finally seen. When it was done, she stayed kneeling a moment longer, because the dead deserved that much. Then she became aware of the silence. The high court was full. Ward had run through the waking hold, faster than any plague, and they had come, all of them, and they stood now in a ring around the kneeling girl and the song she had just given their enemy, and not one of them was laughing. It was Damaris who moved first. The high-born cousin of the king's late mother, who had once walked all the way down to the death house for the pleasure of telling Soraya what she was. Damaris crossed the court with tears on her silver face, sank to one knee, and bowed her head. Then the wolf beside her knelt, then the three behind him, then the cook, and Pell, and Bram with his fist over his heart, and Sigrun, slow on her old joints, smiling. Then the whole high court of Vilemore went down like a field bending under wind, 300 wolves to their knees in the same hall where they had once howled with the joy of despising her, until the only two souls left standing in the heart of the hold were Soraya and the king who had finally chosen her. His hand finding hers above the bowed heads of his entire pack, 1 year, almost to the night, since the same hall had fallen silent for her. This time, every wolf in it had gone down on one knee. The wither left scars the way all true things do. It did not lift like a fog the morning after. The wolves it had nearly taken needed tending for a long season, and some of them woke screaming for months, and there were empty chairs at enough hearths that the hold did not forget, and was not meant to. Soraya would not have let them forget even if they'd tried. She had spent her whole life keeping the dead. She was not about to start pretending the cost of anything was less than it was, now that anyone was finally listening. Theron healed the slowest, and that was as it should be. The names did not leave him. He still said them sometimes under his breath, the wolves the wither took, and the woman in a dawn 12 years gone, and Soraya learned the difference between the nights he needed to be left to it, and the nights he needed her hand pressed flat over his heart until the counting stopped. He was not a man made whole by being loved. No one is. He was a man who learned, slowly with her, that carrying a grief and believing you deserve to lose everything good were two different weights, and that he was only ever required to carry the first. "You're allowed to keep me," she told him once, in the dark, when the old conviction had crept back in. Like a man learning a language, and then, because he was still himself, though you make it a great deal of work. The court, in the end, adjusted faster than the court ever admits it can. It is a remarkable thing how quickly a pack discovers it had always known a queen was magnificent. Once she has saved every one of their lives in a single night. The whispers that followed Soraya now were a different kind. She did not entirely trust them, and she never would. And Sigrun told her that not trusting them was exactly why she would make a good queen and a worse fool than the last one. She kept the death house. That surprised them. A queen of Valemore with a crown she mostly forgot to wear, who still went down to the river door to wash the lowest dead and sing them out herself, because she had not forgotten one single day of being the thing left there, and because the gone had been her first and truest pack, and you do not turn your shoulder on your pack. On the night they named her queen, before the whole gathered hold, in the same hall, beneath the same fat moon in the great window, Soraya stood where she had once held a bowl of ash at the very edge of the room, and she watched 300 faces turn toward her, and she waited for the old cold flicker of being looked at. It did not come. There was only Theron's hand in hers, steady, and the bond humming warm and golden in the hollow that was a hollow no longer. The star that rises last. The kennel mistress had named her, a joke about how long anyone expected her to last at all. She had lasted. She had risen. And she had come up, in the end, over a whole pack that had finally learned to stand when she entered a room, last and brightest and exactly on time.